A thin electric hum threaded through the autumn night as small craft crossed the border, barely visible against the low clouds. Screens in remote command posts flickered with track after track, and a city that had grown used to distant threats felt a sudden, intimate closeness to combat. How could a wave of modest, locally made drones inflict damage measured not just in burnt metal, but in hundreds of millions of dollars and dozens of lives? Open-source accounts and Ukrainian statements described a coordinated operation of inexpensive attack drones in early October. These craft, largely home-built or locally modified, carried small warheads but were launched in numbers to saturate rear-area defenses and logistics sites. Their tactical logic was straightforward: avoid direct attrition against hardened forces and instead strike at the arteries of supply, fuel, ammunition, and manufacturing facilities supporting frontline operations. The drones approached in sequenced waves, exploiting gaps in airspace monitoring that exist beyond frontline interception belts. Without large signatures, they flew low and fast, using terrain masking and night concealment. Local observers reported multiple flashes across industrial zones as the first impacts hit storage tanks and rooflines. The operation prioritized high-value rear targets over symbolic or purely destructive aims. One strike detonated a fuel tank at a regional depot, and the resulting inferno consumed adjacent storage racks and pipeline connections. Another wave found a manufacturing hangar where repair and refurbishment of vehicles were concentrated. A third impact ruptured a munitions store producing secondary explosions. Within minutes, plumes of smoke rose over multiple sites, an operational cascade far from the front but central to sustaining it. Damage assessment teams counted 2 major fuel depots ablaze, a large ordnance warehouse breached, and significant structural loss in an industrial complex servicing logistics. Satellite imagery later showed scorched earth and collapsed roofs across a swath of industrial acreage. Ukrainian officials framed the campaign as aimed at reducing Russia's capacity to project power from its rear logistics bases rather than at maximizing civilian harm. Local emergency responders faced compound hazards. Fires threatened interconnected tanks and munitions, complicating suppression work and requiring cautious withdrawal to avoid further detonations. Crews coordinated with military engineers to limit spread, establishing perimeters and venting pressure where possible. The immediate goal was stabilization, prevent chain detonations and mitigate toxic runoff, while medical teams triaged the injured. Casualty reports indicated roughly 20 Russian personnel killed and additional wounded in the strikes and subsequent explosions. Those figures came from a mix of field reports and open sources and have been treated as preliminary by external observers. Whether military or civilian contractors, the human toll underscored the lethal consequences of targeting supply nodes where personnel and materiel congregate. Economic evaluation followed swiftly. Analysts placed initial replacement and repair costs in the 400 to 500 million USD range, accounting for destroyed infrastructure, lost stockpiles of fuel and munitions, and the economic ripple effects of disrupted supply chains. Such an estimate included hard repair bills, replacement of specialized equipment, and the operational cost of rerouting logistics while facilities were restored. The attackers' cost was small by comparison. Locally produced drones and adapted commercial airframes have unit costs in the low thousands. The strike's material outlay remained a fraction of the damage estimate. That arithmetic revealed a troubling dynamic for logistics-centered warfare. Inexpensive, distributed attacks on rear nodes can force high-cost repairs and degrade an adversary's capacity without engaging their main combat formations directly. Forensic teams worked to piece together flight corridors and impact sequences. Radar logs, cell phone videos, and satellite snapshots were cross-referenced to reconstruct each wave. Analysts used time-stamped evidence to map how multiple launch points and staggered approach vectors enabled hits across a distributed industrial footprint. That reconstruction proved essential both for operational lessons and for diplomatic evidence sharing with partners. Commanders in Moscow expressed immediate alarm and ordered local units to account for losses and repair critical infrastructure. Field notices emphasized dispersal of remaining assets and relocation of vulnerable stocks. Some repair workshops were suspended to prevent secondary targeting. The swift administrative reaction highlighted how a single concentrated logistical strike can force a rapid reallocation of resources away from frontline operations. Kiev's public communications framed the operation as precision disruption aimed at degrading offensive capacity. Officials emphasized targeting military-relevant infrastructure and insisted on efforts to protect civilians. The argument presented was strategic rather than punitive. By reducing fuel and munitions availability, Ukraine would blunt the tempo of further offensive actions while minimizing direct engagements that risk higher civilian casualties. Satellite and open imagery analysts cataloged damage by site: 2 fuel depots with charred storage footprints, 1 large ammunition warehouse with partial roof collapse, and an industrial complex suffering structural loss and equipment burn. Those visible signatures, along with corroborating eyewitness testimony, supported Kiev's claims about the strike's focus and outcomes, allowing allies to assess the operational impact without relying solely on partisan statements. Operationally, the strike complicated Russian resupply patterns for weeks. Convoys were rerouted, fueling points shifted, and spare parts flows delayed by the sudden loss of key nodes. Military logisticians had to find alternative storage and accelerate temporary repairs, costly, time-consuming tasks that reduced immediate operational tempo. The campaign's ripple effect was thus felt beyond the immediate blast zones. Humanitarian agencies reported localized economic disruptions, where fuel shortages slowed public transport and essential deliveries. Municipalities instituted temporary conservation measures for public works and prioritized emergency services. Aid organizations coordinated to ensure hospitals and critical infrastructure received priority refueling, seeing the strike's broader effects on civilian life, even as official military narratives focused on tactical gains. International reaction was swift. Washington and European capitals issued statements emphasizing the need to protect civilian infrastructure while acknowledging the operational logic of targeting military supply. Diplomatic channels buzzed with questions from allies seeking verification and context. The evidence provided by satellite imagery accelerated technical consultations on how best assure Ukraine's own logistics against reciprocal strikes. In Kiev, planners drew lessons: disperse stockpiles, harden key nodes, and accelerate deployment of mobile storage units and decoy sites. While Ukraine lacked large interceptor arrays in that theater for this event, its emphasis was on nimble adaptation. Move, camouflage, and rebuild quickly. Those low-tech measures limit the payoff for attackers who rely on precise hits to concentrated stockpiles. Psychological effects accompanied material losses. Within the Russian logistical community, there was a palpable urgency and a recalibration of vulnerability assumptions. In contrast, Ukrainian messaging sought to bolster public morale, highlighting civic cooperation and rapid recovery work. The differing narratives underscored the dual nature of modern strikes: physical destruction and the informational moral dimensions of wartime action. Analysis in military journals pointed to a wider implication. Rear area strikes change the calculus of sustainment. A force's ability to keep fuel and munitions flowing is as critical as battlefield dispositions. If supply becomes unreliable, offensive options narrow. Conversely, defenders who preserve logistics gain strategic patience, a form of endurance that, over campaigns, can be decisive. Within days, engineers assessed the hardest-hit plants and prioritized repair tasks. Temporary mobile refueling points were installed, and damaged warehouses were ringed with blast barriers and temporary sheds to resume basic throughput. Those emergency fixes allowed limited flows to resume, while permanent reconstruction plans were drafted, work that would take months and significant capital investments to complete. Cost attribution debates emerged publicly. Kyiv asserted operational necessity and offered evidence to allies. Moscow's internal estimates of loss aligned with the higher-end figures. Independent analysts assessing imagery and supply chain implications placed total economic impact in the 400 to 500 million USD range, a figure that combined immediate repair needs and projected operational losses tied to disrupted supply chains. On the battlefield, Russian units temporarily curtailed some offensive operations, citing resupply constraints. Command directives prioritized fuel allocation to essential formations and postponed certain maneuvers contingent on replenishment. That tactical slowdown illustrated the strategic power of targeting the logistics base rather than frontline forces directly. Public diplomacy by Kyiv stayed tightly evidence-focused, sharing images and timelines to support its claims and to solicit further Allied assistance. Allies responded with offers of technical aid aimed at increasing resilience, mobile refueling units, storage hardening expertise, and emergency engineering supplies. The cooperation highlighted how battlefield events translated quickly into material support flows. Civilian resilience remained central. Local volunteer networks aided emergency distribution, businesses opened temporary storage, and NGOs coordinated to ensure essential services continued. Those actions not only mitigated immediate civilian hardship, but also contributed to a durable social buffer that made the population less vulnerable to repeated logistical shocks. Strategists reflected that low-cost UAV attacks targeting logistics create a new kind of pressure, sustained strain rather than decisive battlefield victory. The financial toll, hundreds of millions in this case, combined with human loss, generates political consequences that can outlast tactical engagements. The key response, analysts argued, is multi-layered. Reinforce logistics, improve detection, and internationalize resilience through Allied assistance. The strike's lesson is stark. In modern war, the arteries that feed armies are as vulnerable as any front line. Small, cheap platforms can produce outsized disruption when aimed at storage, fuel, and repair hubs. Recovery depends on speed, dispersal, and Allied support. The wider question remains whether systems can be hardened fast enough to prevent a future rupture of the networks that sustain not only armies, but civilian life itself. In the days that followed, Russian state media attempted to downplay the attack, framing it as a minor sabotage. Yet, independent analysts quickly published satellite imagery showing scorched fuel depots and blackened ruins stretching for hundreds of meters. The evidence left little doubt that Ukraine's low-cost drones had achieved an outsized impact, one that resonated far beyond the smoke rising over Kursk. For Ukraine, this operation symbolized more than just a tactical success. It represented a shift in mindset, a proof that ingenuity and adaptability could counter sheer scale and power. Each drone launched was not just a weapon, but a message that determination, precision, and courage could redraw the boundaries of modern warfare. And for those watching the conflict unfold, it was a reminder that even the quiet hum of a small machine can echo louder than the roar of an empire.